Michael had constructed the entire system from scratch, so naturally he could explain its intricacies to anyone who cared to listen. At 42 years old, he had served as the principal database architect at Nexera Labs in Kansas City for over a decade. Every line of code powering their $850 million financial platform bore his digital signature. Client agreements, trading records, and compliance documentation all flowed through the infrastructure he had built with meticulous attention to detail. That particular Tuesday morning found him seated in Mr. Whitlow's executive office, watching the company president gesture enthusiastically toward his 24-year-old daughter Savannah, as though she possessed some extraordinary talent. She remained focused on her mobile device while her father spoke, occasionally glancing up to offer a rehearsed smile that never quite reached her eyes. Whitlow straightened his expensive tie and continued his presentation about fresh perspectives and modern approaches to business operations. Michael maintained his professional composure while internally processing what he was hearing. When he inquired about implementation timelines, Whitlow leaned back in his leather chair and explained their desire to move quickly through the transition process. Savannah finally looked up from her phone screen to announce that she had been researching artificial intelligence integration and database management protocols, suggesting that the current systems seemed outdated compared to industry standards. For 3 years, Michael had been running advanced AI optimization protocols and had successfully implemented machine learning algorithms that generated $40 million in annual processing cost savings. Despite this achievement, he simply smiled and acknowledged that there was always room for operational improvements. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Whitlow discussing generational perspectives and innovative energy while Savannah asked questions that revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of basic database architecture concepts. After they dismissed him, Michael walked back to his office with measured steps, though something fundamental had shifted in his perception of the situation. Throughout his 12-year tenure, he had never missed a single deadline, never experienced a security breach, and never lost even a fragment of client data. The platform he had designed and maintained handled $2.3 billion in daily transactions across 17 states, supporting insurance companies, investment firms, and pension funds that depended entirely on his architectural expertise. The prospect of transferring this responsibility to someone who apparently confused SQL with an energy drink created a profound sense of unease. Michael sat at his desk and opened the system architecture diagrams, studying the layers of interconnected databases he had created over the years. Each component was secured with personally written protocols, supported by backup systems nested within additional backup systems, with redundancy checks running every 4 minutes throughout the day. The architecture possessed an elegant beauty in its complexity and reliability, but Michael had also embedded something else within the core framework that he had never disclosed to anyone. Years earlier, during a particularly intensive federal regulatory audit, he had installed a final fail-safe mechanism buried deep within the system's foundation. This emergency protocol represented his insurance policy against catastrophic security breaches or unauthorized access attempts. Looking at the framed photograph on his desk showing himself and his father on graduation day from Georgia Tech, Michael remembered his father's advice about building something that would endure beyond his own career. He had accomplished that goal, though apparently longevity was no longer valued by the current management structure. Michael had joined Nexera Labs immediately after college graduation, when the company operated as a 15-person startup in a converted warehouse in the Crossroads district. Whitlow had been different in those early days, displaying hunger and focus while willing to work alongside his employees rather than delegating from above. They would spend 18-hour days developing revolutionary financial data processing technology that could handle real-time transactions while maintaining perfect security compliance standards. Those initial years felt like a family environment where Whitlow would purchase pizza for the entire team when they achieved significant milestones. He knew every employee's name and even remembered details about their families. When Michael's mother became seriously ill in 2018, Whitlow provided 2 months of paid leave without requiring any justification or paperwork. As the platform expanded and they secured major contracts with pension funds, insurance companies, and regional banks, the elegant architecture Michael had designed proved capable of infinite scaling. By 2020, they were processing transactions for clients throughout the Midwest region. However, success brought unwanted changes to the company culture and management philosophy. Whitlow began hiring executives who wore expensive suits and spoke constantly about maximizing shareholder value rather than focusing on technical excellence. The converted warehouse was replaced by a gleaming office tower in the downtown area, and the pizza nights disappeared entirely. Whitlow started traveling more frequently, delegating increasing responsibilities, and trusting spreadsheet data instead of relying on his instincts and experience. Savannah had maintained a presence around the office since high school through summer internships that primarily involved answering phones and organizing filing systems. While she possessed adequate intelligence, she had never demonstrated genuine interest in the technical aspects of the business. During her college years, she had chosen business administration as her major with a marketing minor, representing safe but unremarkable academic choices. Recent months had brought subtle but noticeable changes in workplace dynamics. Whitlow would walk past Michael's office without stopping for their usual casual conversations, and during meetings, he would ask other people to explain decisions that Michael had made independently. These seemed like minor adjustments, but Michael noticed every shift in the established patterns. The questions about documentation became more frequent and pointed. The new chief operating officer explained during a staff meeting that institutional knowledge could not remain locked within individual employees' minds and must be properly recorded for future reference. Michael had always maintained comprehensive documentation of his work, but something about their requests suggested they were preparing for someone else to read those documents. 2 weeks before the final confrontation, Michael discovered a security vulnerability in one of their client interfaces. The issue was not critical but required immediate attention to maintain system integrity. He resolved the problem in 40 minutes, ran complete diagnostics, and confirmed that all security measures were functioning properly. The next day, Whitlow summoned him to the executive office for what he described as a protocol discussion. Whitlow explained that any system modifications, regardless of their scope or urgency, required prior approval from management before implementation. Michael pointed out that the security patch had been necessary to prevent system exposure, and waiting for approval would have created unnecessary risks. Whitlow acknowledged this reasoning but mentioned that Savannah had raised concerns about unauthorized modifications to systems she could not even access. This revelation made it clear that management was not planning to work with Michael but rather to replace him entirely. He began developing his own contingency plans that same afternoon, understanding that his position was no longer secure regardless of his performance history or technical expertise. The email arrived on Thursday morning at 8:47 with the subject line "Organizational Restructuring Confidential, effective immediately." The message announced leadership changes in the technology division, with Michael transitioning from his current role to provide consulting support during a knowledge transfer period while Savannah assumed responsibilities as chief database officer. After reading the message twice, Michael opened his system administrator panel and examined the access logs, discovering that they had already created new credentials for Savannah and granted her administrative privileges that she had neither earned nor understood. 12 years of 70-hour workweeks, 12 years of perfect system uptime, and 12 years of building infrastructure that generated hundreds of millions in revenue were being transferred to someone who had never written a single line of production code. The knowledge transfer period was scheduled for 2 weeks, during which Michael would supposedly teach Whitlow's daughter how to manage systems that had required a decade to design and implement. The prospect of explaining complex security protocols to someone who probably used simple passwords for her social media accounts seemed both futile and insulting. Michael walked to the break room and prepared coffee, sitting at one of the uncomfortable high tables while looking out at the Kansas City skyline. The building where he had spent his career and created something remarkable suddenly felt alien and unwelcoming. His phone buzzed with a text message from his brother Jake in Denver asking about work conditions, and Michael almost laughed at the timing of the question. The fundamental issue was that they did not understand database architecture principles. Information storage involves relationships and dependencies between interconnected components, and removing critical elements without understanding these connections inevitably leads to system failures. They viewed Michael as just another replaceable employee, but they were fundamentally wrong about his role in the organization. After finishing his coffee, Michael returned to his office and accessed the master system architecture, admiring the beautiful interconnected databases he had designed to function in perfect harmony. Each component was secured with personally written protocols and backed up through systems he had configured during the early years. Deep within the core framework, buried in subsection 7 of the emergency protocols, lay something special that he had installed during those paranoid early days when they feared corporate espionage or hostile takeover attempts. The kill switch was elegant in its simplicity and purpose. If unauthorized personnel attempted to take control of the system or modify core protocols without proper clearance, the system would protect itself by erasing everything rather than allowing compromise. Michael had never disclosed this failsafe to anyone, including Whitlow, other engineers, or federal auditors who had examined their security measures. It represented his insurance policy and final protection mechanism. Looking at Savannah's new administrative credentials, Michael realized that the system would soon detect what it interpreted as an unauthorized takeover attempt. He closed his laptop and went home early for the first time in 12 years, understanding that events were now beyond his direct control. The knowledge transfer meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at 9 o'clock. Michael arrived 15 minutes early and prepared conference room B, which offered large windows overlooking the plaza where food trucks gathered during lunch hours. He had printed comprehensive documentation packets, prepared detailed system diagrams, and created simplified flowcharts showing data movement through their various platforms. Savannah arrived 20 minutes late, carrying an oversized coffee and talking loudly on her phone about weekend social plans. Traffic congestion was her explanation for the delay, though Monday morning traffic in Kansas City followed predictable patterns that any local resident should anticipate. She sat across from Michael and produced a brand new MacBook Pro that still had protective plastic covering the screen. Michael began with fundamental concepts, explaining that their platform managed financial data for 47 major clients and describing how transactions flowed from input systems through processing layers to final storage destinations. He outlined the security protocols that protected all stored information and demonstrated basic monitoring procedures that any database administrator should understand. Savannah nodded along and occasionally typed notes, but her confusion became apparent by the third presentation slide. She suggested that the system seemed unnecessarily complicated and wondered whether cloud storage might offer a simpler solution. The prospect of moving $850 million worth of regulated financial data to cloud infrastructure would require 18 months of regulatory approval and cost approximately $40 million to implement properly. Despite this explanation, Savannah made a note to look into cloud options as a money-saving measure, demonstrating her complete misunderstanding of both regulatory requirements and implementation costs. They spent 3 hours reviewing basic system operations, including server health monitoring, diagnostic report generation, and error log interpretation, all elementary concepts that most database administrators mastered during their first week of employment. Around noon, Savannah announced that she was beginning to understand the system, comparing it to a really large Excel spreadsheet. This comparison revealed such a fundamental misunderstanding of database architecture that Michael could only stare at her in disbelief before correcting her misconception as diplomatically as possible. That afternoon brought an email from Whitlow requesting another meeting. When Michael entered the executive office, Savannah was already present and appeared upset about something. Whitlow explained that his daughter had concerns about the morning training session, specifically that Michael was being deliberately obtuse and making systems appear more complicated than necessary. Michael looked at Savannah, who was staring at her phone and avoiding eye contact, then explained that the system's complexity reflected the complex operations it handled and that federal compliance regulations could not be simplified for training purposes. Savannah looked up and accused him of using technical jargon to make her feel inadequate, apparently considering federal compliance regulations to be unnecessarily technical language. Whitlow suggested adjusting their approach to focus on high-level management concepts instead of technical details. Michael pointed out that high-level database management required understanding technical details, prompting Whitlow to argue that he had been running the company for 15 years without understanding technical specifics. Michael clarified that Whitlow had been managing the business side while the technical operations ran smoothly because of robust and stable system architecture. When Savannah snorted and claimed that systems could not run themselves, Michael explained that well-designed systems could indeed operate autonomously, which was the entire purpose of good architectural planning. Whitlow expressed appreciation for Michael's contributions but emphasized the need to consider future directions, suggesting that Savannah brought fresh ideas and modern perspectives that might justify new approaches to their established systems. Michael asked what specific new approaches they were considering, and Savannah enthusiastically suggested implementing blockchain technology and artificial intelligence to automate routine operations. Michael had been running AI optimization protocols for 3 years, while blockchain implementation would be equivalent to rebuilding their building's foundation using toy blocks. When he asked about regulatory implications of these suggestions, Savannah admitted she had not researched compliance requirements but expressed confidence in her ability to figure out federal banking regulations. 2 days later, while copying system documentation to an external drive, Michael noticed unusual activity in the server logs. Someone had been accessing administrative functions during off hours, including late nights, early mornings, and weekends. The detailed access records revealed that Todd Brennan, their chief information officer, had been using credentials that should not have included access to the core database modules Michael had designed. Further investigation revealed that Todd had been creating comprehensive architectural maps of their entire system for the past 6 weeks, including deep technical documentation that covered security protocols, backup procedures, and fail-safe mechanisms. This represented the type of documentation someone would create when planning to completely replace the system's original architect. Additional searching uncovered email chains between Todd and an outside consulting firm called Zentrin Global, discussing legacy system modernization and knowledge extraction protocols. These conversations had been ongoing for 3 months, indicating that management had been planning this transition far longer than Michael had realized. The emails included procurement requests for new hardware servers designed to replace the custom-built infrastructure Michael had created, along with meeting notes discussing succession planning and reducing single points of failure. The worst discovery came when Michael accessed the executive file server, finding a hidden subfolder marked Strategic Planning 2024 that contained a presentation titled Database Operations Transition dated 6 weeks earlier. The presentation outlined their complete plan, including phases for documenting existing systems, identifying external modernization resources, implementing leadership transitions, and retiring legacy architecture and personnel. Slide 12 made their intentions crystal clear, with estimated cost savings from personnel reduction totaling $180,000 annually, which exactly matched Michael's salary. They were not bringing in Savannah because of her fresh ideas or innovative perspectives, but because she would work for half his salary and never question their decisions. Technical complexity, 12 years of perfect uptime, and hundreds of millions in revenue generated through his systems were all irrelevant compared to the appeal of reducing payroll expenses. After printing the presentation and sitting in his car for 20 minutes reading through their elimination plan, Michael realized they had been incredibly thorough in documenting every system he managed, every process he had created, and every security protocol he had implemented. However, they had missed one crucial element in their comprehensive analysis. They had documented the systems Michael had built, but they had not discovered the systems he had hidden. The emergency protocols buried deep in the core framework included fail-safe mechanisms that would not appear in any standard audit or documentation review. These security measures had been installed during the paranoid early days when they were convinced someone might attempt to steal their intellectual property or compromise their systems. Michael had originally designed these protections to defend against external threats like corporate espionage, cyber attacks, or hostile takeovers, never imagining that the threat would emerge from within the organization itself. The elegant aspect of well-designed security protocols is their inability to distinguish between external and internal threats, responding only to unauthorized access attempts regardless of their source. According to the embedded security algorithms Michael had created, someone was about to attempt a massive unauthorized takeover of critical systems, triggering automatic protective responses. Michael stopped at an electronics store on his way home and purchased a new laptop that had never been connected to Nexera's network, ensuring no digital fingerprints could link the device to him personally. He needed to conduct research and make preparations using equipment that could not be traced back to his activities. The final meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon and described as a transition celebration, complete with cake in the break room, speeches about new beginnings, and handshakes all around. Thursday night, Michael worked at home using the laptop he had purchased, not planning anything dramatic but simply ensuring he understood exactly how his own systems would respond to unauthorized access attempts. The emergency protocols he had built years earlier were elegantly simple in their operation. If someone without proper biometric authorization attempted to modify core database structures, the system would interpret this as a hostile takeover attempt and implement total data protection protocols, essentially erasing all stored information rather than allowing it to fall into unauthorized hands. The logic had been sound when he designed it during their early days handling sensitive government contracts, operating on the principle that losing everything was preferable to allowing compromise. The trigger mechanism required biometric authentication through Michael's fingerprint, which he scanned every morning when logging into the system. If someone else attempted to access core functions without his biometric signature, the protection protocols would automatically activate. Originally, Michael had planned to disable these protocols before leaving the company, ensuring a clean shutdown and safe transition without problems for anyone involved. However, circumstances had changed dramatically since he discovered their months-long plan to eliminate him and their perception of him as nothing more than an expensive liability requiring removal. The situation no longer warranted his protection or consideration of their interests. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, prompting Michael to dress carefully in his best shirt and the tie his father had given him for college graduation. If this was to be his final day at Nexera Labs, he wanted to maintain professional standards until the end. The morning passed quietly as he organized his desk, backed up personal files, and deleted his browser history to remove any traces of personal activity. At 11 o'clock, Michael walked to the server room for one final system check, finding everything in perfect operational condition. $850 million worth of financial data remained organized and protected by systems he had spent 12 years perfecting. Client records dating back to the company's founding, comprehensive trading histories, and compliance documentation all continued humming along beautifully in their interconnected harmony. Michael ran his biometric scan one final time, with fingerprint recognition confirming his identity as the authorized administrator. All systems displayed green status indicators, confirming optimal performance across every component and subsystem he had created. The celebration began at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, with Whitlow delivering a speech about exciting new directions and fresh perspectives for the company's future. Savannah discussed her vision for modernizing their technological approach, while Todd presented Michael with a commemorative plaque thanking him for years of dedicated service. Nobody mentioned the months of planning that had preceded his termination or their cost-saving motivations for the personnel change. At 3:30, Whitlow called Michael into his office for their final conversation, beginning with comments about how difficult this transition was for everyone involved and suggesting it was time for Michael to pursue new challenges elsewhere. Michael acknowledged his understanding of the situation, and Whitlow offered what he described as a generous severance package consisting of 6 weeks' salary in exchange for 12 years of perfect service. Savannah was already sitting in Michael's chair when they returned to his office, logged into his computer and clicking through system menus with the confidence of someone who had no comprehension of what she was examining. She announced brightly that she was getting the hang of the system, and Michael smiled while assuring her that she would do great in her new role. Michael cleaned out his desk drawers, collecting a few personal photographs, some technical books, and the coffee mug his nephew had given him for Christmas. He shook hands with former colleagues and accepted their awkward condolences before walking to his car at 4:45. At 5 o'clock, Savannah would attempt to modify core database settings to implement her new approaches, triggering the unauthorized access detection protocols at 5:01 and activating total data protection at 5:02. Michael drove home and waited on his back porch, drinking beer and watching the sunset when his phone buzzed at 5:17. Todd Brennan's name appeared on the screen, and his panicked voice immediately conveyed the severity of their situation. The entire database platform had gone offline, with every system showing as corrupted or missing. All client files, transaction records, and backup systems had vanished completely. When Michael suggested checking the emergency recovery protocols, Todd explained that they could not locate them, and Savannah's attempt to update security settings had apparently caused everything to crash simultaneously. Michael expressed surprise at this development and suggested contacting the backup data center, but Todd reported that backup systems were showing identical errors. $850 million worth of data had simply disappeared, clients were already calling with complaints, and they desperately needed Michael to return and fix the problem. Michael finished his beer and reminded Todd that he no longer worked there, having been transitioned out that afternoon. When Todd pleaded that Michael was the only person who understood how the systems worked, Michael pointed out that everything had been documented and suggested that Savannah should have mentioned this during the knowledge transfer process. After a long silence, Todd begged for Michael's help, but Michael explained that without authorized access credentials, he could do nothing to assist them, and since he was no longer an employee, he had no authority to intervene. He hung up as the phone immediately rang again, this time showing Whitlow's name on the caller identification. By Monday morning, news had spread throughout Kansas City's financial sector about Nexera Labs suffering what industry analysts described as catastrophic data loss affecting 47 major clients. federal regulators were launching investigations, and the company's stock price had dropped 87% over 3 days. Michael read about the situation in the Kansas City Star while eating breakfast at a local diner, noting that the article quoted Whitlow claiming they were working around the clock to restore service, though anonymous sources suggested the data was completely unrecoverable. The news coverage made no mention of unauthorized system modifications or Savannah's attempt to implement new security protocols without understanding existing architecture, describing only a tragic technology failure that nobody could explain adequately. Michael's phone had been ringing constantly with calls from reporters seeking comments, former colleagues asking questions, and lawyers representing angry clients, but he had stopped answering entirely. Tuesday afternoon, Michael drove downtown and parked across from the Nexera building, observing boxes stacked near the lobby elevators as people packed their offices and abandoned the failing company. The food truck he used to visit during lunch breaks had disappeared, probably due to lack of customers in the area. Reflecting on all those years of 18-hour days and weekends spent optimizing systems and solving problems that nobody else understood, Michael remembered the pride he had felt watching their platform grow from a startup experiment into something that handled billions of dollars in transactions. They had discarded all of that achievement for salary savings of $180,000. Wednesday morning brought news that Nexera Labs was filing for bankruptcy, with assets being liquidated to pay creditors and client settlements. Michael deleted the article without finishing it, having no interest in reading about the final collapse of everything he had built. Thursday marked the beginning of Michael's new position at a private equity firm in Luxembourg, offering triple his previous salary, full relocation package, and a 5-year contract. They had found him rather than the reverse, as news travels quickly within the database architecture community, and his reputation for technical excellence had preceded the collapse of his former employer.